So I'm Barbara Hemmendinger, and I'm the behavioral science faculty member at Williamsport Family Medicine Residency Program in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where I have been since 1977. And I went to a very early Society of Teachers of Family Medicine regional meeting for our Northeast region in Pittsburgh a year or two after I took on that position, and that's the first place that I had heard of Balint training. I was very taken with it and went to some longer sessions, and eventually came back to it and became a credentialed leader thanks to the supervision of Frank Dornfest and Albert Lichtenstein, and have been running a Balint group with my co-leader, Dr. Jim Redica, in Williamsport for the past 15 or so years. So what I'm about to tell you about is one experience of many in the course of this long history. And you know, sometimes in Balint training, residents resist the concept of Balint. It's not the black and white, hard, cold facts of medicine. It's not the typical case conference. And in my experience, I came across the president of the Hungarian Balint Society. I had been traveling with a community group that was doing a tour, a singing tour actually, in Central Europe back in 2001. And one of the places we were going to was Hungary. And in preparation for that, I had actually asked Dr. John Selinsky, whom I'd met at a Balint intensive, where I might be able to locate Michael Balint's home. Dr. Balint, as many of you know, was born in Hungary, in Budapest, and as a person of Jewish background during the Nazi time had to flee his home, and he resettled in England, and I think the rest is history in terms of his work at the Tavistock Clinic and in setting up Balint training with his second wife, Enid Balint, after that period of time. So John very graciously put me in touch with Dr. Nelly Bobé, who was at that time the president of the Hungarian Balint Society, and we communicated through email. And so when I arrived in Hungary, we made arrangements to meet, and she spent an entire afternoon with my husband and me touring us around the cities of Buda and Pest on either side of the Danube River. And she took us to Dr. Balint's home and office. And you might want to take a peek at some of the photographs we took at the time of Dr. Bobé and me and the building where Dr. Balint had himself been born and actually practiced until he left Hungary under the terrible conditions of the impending Nazi domination of that area. So in her talking to me, not only did we talk about the history of Balint in Hungary, but we talked about what it was like during her tenure, and she was a clinical psychologist practicing in Budapest for many years, especially during the time that Hungary was one of the satellite states of the Soviet Union. And in that time, psychiatry in the Soviet states and in the Soviet Union especially was used for very political purposes. People who were basically persona non grata were often sent to psychiatric hospitals as a means of keeping them silent. And Dr. Bobé said, therefore, the whole notion of any psychoanalytic psychotherapy or any treatments based on that particular philosophy and method was completely forbidden. So how do you do Balint groups if you can't speculate and free associate some? And so she told us the story that it was really impossible to call it Balint group. It was impossible to call it any kind of open-ended speculation because that was very threatening to the political powers. And yet there was a following and there was a hunger among the medical professionals that she was training to do this work. And they somehow managed to call it case conferences and to proceed under guarded circumstances. She also indicated that she had lots of interest in following the work of the International Balint Federation and the Balint Societies elsewhere in Europe and in the US. but she was never permitted to submit papers, nor was she particularly able to travel to meetings and conferences and congresses abroad. She could have had some ability to leave the country, but once doing that for anything that was considered politically objectionable, she would not have been able to return. And all of her family, elderly parents and children, still lived in Hungary, and she wasn't willing to make that sacrifice. So it was very, very interesting to see that the sometimes technique that some of our residents complain about as being something that's really not all that necessary to their work in family medicine is something that was very prized and difficult to attain by colleagues living under a different set of political and cultural circumstances. So I just wanted folks to know about that, with many thanks to Dr. Bobé and all of those who at that time were behind the Iron Curtain, as they say.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.